Welcome to the Diversity Connector podcast, where we explore the rich tapestry of human experiences. I'm your host, Gertrude Mache, and I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the country on which we meet today. I would also like to pay my respects to elders, past, present, and emerging, and together as we dive into conversations that bridge cultures, challenge stereotypes, and celebrate the unique perspectives each of us brings to the table. Each episode is a journey through stories and insights from a kaleidoscope of voices, each sharing their colorful narrative. Whether you're at home, on the go, or just anywhere in between, you're now part of a community that values understanding, inclusivity, and the beauty of diversity. So plug in your headphones, get comfortable, and let's connect through the power of our shared stories. Welcome, and thank you for joining us on the Diversity Connector podcast. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Diversity Connector. This is Gertrude Mache here in beautiful Melbourne, Australia. And today we are graced with the presence of yet another fascinating woman. Welcome, welcome, welcome to our tribe. As you know, the Diversity Connector is bringing you stories from all over the world so we can share in our diverse experiences. So please introduce yourself, tell us where you're based, how old you are, and share your story with us today.
Thank you so much for having me on your show, Gertrude. It's a delight to be here. My name is Johanna Lyman. I use she, they pronouns, and being that I am in the world of diversity and inclusion, I tend to use my social identifiers and also do a visual description for those who may be low vision. So I am a fair-skinned white woman with short auburn hair, wearing a black V-neck top in my small office that has yellow walls and a blue, what would we call those, curtain and a wooden screen behind me. I identify as a cisgendered queer woman. I am 56 years old, so over the age of 40, and I have invisible disabilities, along with a whole lot of privilege. As I said, it's a pleasure to be here. I have been in the world of diversity and inclusion for almost 9 years now. And during that time, I've been a consultant, so working with small privately owned companies, nonprofit, government entities, helping them to create cultures of inclusion and belonging. And I like to say that Abraham Maslow was wrong, that the physiological needs are not at the bottom of the needs pyramid that he so famously developed, but in fact, belonging is at the very foundation of getting all of our needs met. Back in the day, our ancient ancestors from some 40,000 years ago, if they didn't belong to their tribe, they were dead. Saber-toothed tiger would come and get them, or they would starve to death or freeze to death. So belonging is absolutely foundational to the experience of being a human being. And unfortunately, in the world, in the corporate world, even I would say in education, when we're small children, we learn through those often unspoken expectations of how we should behave and interact with others. And we don't get to always express the fullness of our being. Now, we are wired for belonging, and we're also wired to make that connection via stories. So it's the stories we tell ourselves and the stories that we tell each other that help us create a sense of belonging or not. Depending on how much of yourself you have to hide away because you're listening to those unspoken expectations, you may feel very, very lonely. I know I sure did as a little kid. Definitely did not feel like I belonged in my family of origin. And that is actually what makes me so passionate about helping organizations create cultures of true belonging, where people can bring their whole selves to work. So in my early days, I was in corporate America for about the first, 15 years. And I actually left a number of roles and organizations because I was asked to do something at each one of them. There were 3 in total that was outside of my value system. And I am a person, one of my top 4 values is integrity. And if you ask me to do something that feels like maybe it's not illegal, I was never asked to do anything illegal, but maybe just not right. Or not in the best interests of all of the stakeholders. And I just couldn't do it. And I recognize and I want to acknowledge the tremendous amount of privilege that I have in my life that allowed me, the last time I left an organization, to just walk away without a plan B. I just couldn't do it anymore. And fortunately, my beloved was in a position where he was able to take care of both of us. And that, again, like just such a huge amount of privilege that I'm so grateful for. And when I left corporate, so I'd worked for a number of really smart people who were really terrible people managers. This was mostly in the 1990s. And so, there was not an emphasis on the so-called soft skills like emotional intelligence and communication skills. So there was just, what's the bottom line? What have you done for me lately? And I remember this pivotal moment. It was December 31st, 1999. And for those of you who probably remember, that was the whole Y2K panic. We did not know what would happen with all of our computer systems when the clock turned from the 1990s to the year 2000. Was everything going to crash? Were we going to be okay? And I was working for she was at the time the only CEO of a Fortune 500 company. And she had a reputation for being one of the worst bosses in America. And this is according to Fortune magazine, so a fairly reputable source. And she deserved she deserved it. Yeah, I remember being in the boardroom with her on December 31st in the late afternoon, and she was just making personal attacks on the people in the room with her that were just completely inappropriate. And she was finally convinced to let us all get home, because if we didn't make it home before the clocks turned, she might have to pay for us all for another however long it would take to fix things and we could get our way home. So got on the plane and something in me snapped. And I vowed that I would never allow myself to be treated like that again. A minute later, I had the realization, like a bolt of lightning, that despite her reputation, I really didn't believe that she woke up in the morning trying to figure out how to make our lives miserable. I know that people do the best they can with the skills they have. And if you don't know better, you can't do better. So I made a decision at that point that I would help leaders. I would find a way to help leaders become better human beings so that they could be better leaders. And I started making plans. It took a few years for it to come to fruition, but I became an executive and a life coach and really just started working with executives on the so-called soft skills like emotional intelligence, which I frankly think is the most important skill that a person can learn how to do, especially a person in a position of leadership, to become more self-aware, to learn how to manage your own emotions, to become socially aware so that you can read the room and understand what's happening, what dynamics might be in place, and how you can help people be better and do better through relationship management. So that's what I have been doing since January of 2005. So quite a very long time. I've now officially been longer outside of corporate than I was inside, but I did have that, I think it's important to have an insider view on what's happening in corporate to be able to help executives from outside the organization, as an outsider looking in and being able to say, listen, I've been in your seat before. I know the pressures that you're under. And I also know how to make your life a lot easier if you can master these skills. Emotional intelligence, I would say the second most important skill is communication, both really good listening skills and also how to navigate those difficult conversations and where there might be conflict. And we, at least in the United States, we are often, I would see, work with clients over the years at organizations that had a culture of niceness. They were so nice, they wouldn't bring up any problems or budding problems that they saw because they didn't want to rock the boat. They didn't want to make things difficult. The problem is that when problems are swept under the rug when they're small, they balloon, and then they're not addressed until it's a disaster or a disaster that is imminent. So teaching people how to navigate those conversations without getting emotions all in the way or getting tripped up about, not wanting to hurt someone's feelings. There are absolutely ways to have direct, compassionate conversations with people, even people that you are at the polar opposite end of the spectrum on a subject. So that is what I have been doing in my life since 2005. And along the way, I was invited. I call them downloads, an invitation from Spirit or from the universe to direct and produce a theater performance. And it was called Opening Pandora's Box, Stories of Truth and Hope. And these were stories of women who had overcome unbelievable odds, had terrible things happen to them. And the things that happened to them turned out to happen for their benefit. That the things that happened to them that seemed so horrible in the midst of it ended up helping them find a path forward for really meaningful work in the world. Like a woman who was terrified of death, and her mother was dying, and her mother was given a hospice worker. And the hospice worker told her, this will be the most beautiful experience you've ever gone through. Really? My mother's dying? How could you say that? And it turned into the most beautiful experience of her life. And she now is a hospice worker as well as a psychologist, helping people through the process and the transition of death and dying. And it is incredibly fulfilling for her. And that was just one of almost 24 stories over the course of a couple of performances. The first one was in California, and the second was in the Boston area. And so I think that experience really made me understand more fully the importance of owning your story or owning my story and sharing it. Because when we share our stories, what is it they say? Troubles that are shared are halved. When we share our stories authentically, we never know how these stories are going to impact other people, how they might inspire someone else. So I am just super passionate about, especially female entrepreneurs, especially women of color who are developing a business, they're entrepreneurs, and it's criminal how little money they get of the VC funding. And I know there are organizations that are working to change that and to give women of color access to more funding. And I know that my friend Gertrude is one of those women. And so it is just really an absolute delight and a pleasure to be here with you all.
So thank you so much for sharing your story with us today. I have to say, this has been the most inclusive interview I've done so far, and I've learned something very, very pivotal with your visual description of yourself this morning. You know, a lot of times we forget that there's people listening into these podcasts who might not have the gift of sight, who are listening in, have no idea what the people look like who are presenting. So thank you for that.
You're
That is
welcome. That is actually a practice in a community, the beloved community that I'm a part of. And that's where I learned it from.
Oh, I love it. Now, you express yourself from an intersectional lens that when somebody looks at you, might miss the layers that make up the essence of who you truly are. You know, on the
Yes.
surface, I see a white woman, instant judgment would be privilege. Living in America, life must be, you know, smooth and easy. And how often do we make these assumptions of people and we miss getting to really understand who they are? Let's talk a little bit about the importance of understanding intersectionality in diversity.
Yes, yes. And I'm very aware that my marginalized identities, except for being female, I could hide very easily. You know, I'm queer, but I pass. I'm happen to be married to a man because he caught me before a woman did, but that's the only reason. I'm like straight down the middle bisexual. And like I said, my disabilities are invisible, but I am hard of hearing. And I also am working to heal some complex PTSD. And as a result of that, I also have IBS, which is just not fun to experience. So it is, you know, and this beloved community that I'm a part of really is so mindful and aware of the intersectionalities. And one of our tenets is like, we don't make any assumptions about anyone, you know, and that has helped me tremendously, where the way I was raised was very judgmental. So it's been quite a process of backing away from that initial impulse to judge.
Yes, yes. So tell me about the importance of finding community. You know, a lot of times people find themselves isolated, alone, and misunderstood. How did you find your community, and why is community so important?
Yes. So whiteness does not do community very well at all. In fact, one of the symptoms of whiteness, or to be very blunt, white supremacy, is this ethos of the rugged individual. So I can do it all by myself. I can pull myself up from my bootstraps and I don't need any support. And that is just utter nonsense. Human beings are tribal creatures. We cannot survive on our own. We have to have community. I mean, if I had to survive on my own, I don't know how to grow food. I don't know how my computer works aside from pressing the on button. Like without thousands or millions of other people, I wouldn't be able to be here doing the work that I do and being the human that I am. So the community that I'm a part of is started as an anti-racism community, and the founder of the organization was one of my first anti-racism teachers in 2018. And we have since moved from calling ourselves anti-racist, although we certainly are, but we are on a communal liberation journey with the understanding that none of us can be liberated unless and until all of us are liberated. And so for example, just one small example, the trauma healing work, the somatic work that I'm doing to heal from the trauma that I had in my childhood is necessary for my liberation. And it enables me to be more present in my community so that I can support other folks on this journey in their own liberation. And whether it's from them hearing me tell my story, or someone today asked for some recommendations of somatic workers who do trauma work, it has just been so profound. I don't know if that answered your question. I might have lost the thread along the way.
No, it certainly did. It's really important to be able to belong to a group that understands who you are. Now, you have been through quite a journey with your diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, leadership, coaching, strategic planning. Walk us through that journey that led you to leave the corporate world in 2005 and pursue conscious capitalism.
Yes. So the body of work that I developed is called Brave Cultures. And Brave Cultures, the seed was planted when I first read the book Conscious Capitalism by Raj Sisodia and John Mackey, who was one of the founders of Whole Foods. Before that book, I didn't realize that there were organizations that considered themselves conscious, that they were led by conscious leaders. They were purpose-driven. They developed conscious cultures, and they had a whole stakeholder orientation, not just shareholders. So they considered anyone impacted by the organization to be a stakeholder. So that includes employees, families of employees, it includes the community, it includes the planet. And so when I understood that this was actually a movement, and it has become a growing movement now, there are B Corps, which are a whole public benefit corporation is a legal structure that they are mandated to take all stakeholders into consideration when they're making decisions. So they can't have those, the third quarter just ended. How are we going to make the most profit possible? And then not think about things for the long term. In fact, the B Corp slogan is, let's make capitalism work for everyone and for the long term.
Oh, wow.
Which is really beautiful. So the body of work that I developed is loosely based on the 4 tenets of conscious capitalism. So Brave Cultures are purpose-driven. They are wildly inclusive, which speaks to the conscious culture. They are fiercely inclusive, which speaks to the stakeholder orientation, and they're led by conscious and inclusive leaders. And BRAVE is an acronym. It stands for, these are cultures that have a sense of belonging. They are results oriented. They are accountable to each other. They are vulnerable with each other. And they are fully engaged in the work that they're doing.
Oh, okay. Oh, I love that. I really love that. Now, you challenged Maslow's hierarchy of needs in the beginning of your presentation. Can you delve deeper into this idea and its implications for organizational culture?
Sure. So I first want to presence that Maslow lived in and among Indigenous people in North America, and it was through his time with the tribe, and I forget the tribe that he was a part of. Please forgive me, I will try to find that for you. So he kind of stole these Indigenous ideas of what it means to be in community together, and of course never gave them credit because that's whiteness at work. But he then anglicized it, and so he put the lens of whiteness on it and came up with the idea that having our physiological needs met were the number one: to not pass go, to not collect $200 if you don't get your physiological needs met, which is true. And the part that he conveniently skipped over is that you can't get your physiological needs met unless you're in community. Because if you're not in community, you are out of luck. I mean, even so, I talked a little bit about our ancient ancestors worried about the saber-toothed tigers or freezing to death. But imagine even today, an infant born, not in a hospital, it happens. But then what happens when the parents leave? So the baby is not capable of getting their own physiological needs met. They are only capable of connecting with their caregivers. And it is their only job in the first several months of life is to make sure that they have connected with someone, that they belong to an adult who can care for them. And that to me is just, it's so poignant to think about that. And it gets me really mad that he skipped over that.
Yeah, that is just interesting. And it's really interesting that there is a lot of misappropriation of Indigenous content, concepts that are there in tribal cultures that are misappropriated and then misinterpreted as well.
Yes.
Very, very interesting observation.
Whiteness does a good job at co-opting good ideas.
So in your experience, what are some of the most common mistakes that leaders make that unintentionally result in their employees feeling excluded?
I see two really common themes. The first is they think about diversity and inclusion as an initiative. And if you think about it as an initiative, it's doomed from the start. Diversity and inclusion are part of the weave of a culture. Like they're the warp or the weft, the one goes one way, one goes the other way, that they, to succeed, they have to be embedded deeply in the values, in the mission and the vision, and the operationally, like how do we know that we're living our values? So that's the first thing, is that they think it's like we can put it in its box over here, check it, and it's done. That's not how it works. And the second thing that I see so often is that companies will start with unconscious bias training. And they do that because they're thinking of it as an initiative, and because they want to check a box, and we're the good white folks, we did our unconscious bias training. But actually, a number of studies have shown that unconscious bias training often makes things worse. And that might sound counterintuitive, but if you think about it, I'm a white person, I'm being called into this mandatory training for unconscious bias, and suddenly I'm being told how all the ways that I think and act are wrong. So it feels very punitive. And then when someone is told that the way they're doing things is wrong, like the knee-jerk response is to double down. Yes. Or and change is really hard. Change is super difficult for people. So we're asking them to change, but we're not giving them the foundational intrapersonal skills that they need to be able to navigate change. In fact, there's a model that emerged from the social justice world that talks about the three sort of related aspects of inclusion and belonging training or work. And one is the intrapersonal. How can I be a better human so I can be a better leader? Yes. Then it's the interpersonal, which is where we get into the unconscious bias training. But if I haven't done the work inside myself first, I'm just going to get defensive, and I'm not going to want to change. So, and then the third aspect of it is, I think of them as like a Venn diagram, is systemic nature of oppression. So really taking a good look at policies and procedures, and how are we doing our hiring and onboarding, and even just the assessing all the resumes that come in before we start to decide who we want to bring in for interviews. So those three aspects have to happen kind of concurrently in order for it to really work.
They can't work in isolation. I like that. So can you share a success story or a case study from your consulting work where implementing DEIB strategies resulted in a tangible, positive outcome for that organization?
Yes, I can. And I will say that this is kind of an unusual situation, because culture work takes time, right? It takes 3 to 5 years on average. It's not an overnight job. You don't just drop in for 3 months and have, you can start to see an impact in as little as 3 months. And I did with this small nonprofit organization. They were a white-led nonprofit. The executive director was he was just one of the most well-known figures in the field. And but they were serving marginalized communities, mostly Black and brown communities. And he had always been, from like the 60s, he had been kind of a sage from the stage. And he did know a lot. I mean, he was certainly an expert, but he would go into these marginalized communities on his soapbox, telling people what to do. And this was, George Floyd had just been murdered. So it was very, very tone deaf. So I went in there and I did a needs assessment, which is where you have to start to figure out where you are now. So I did a needs assessment and uncovered the primary issue being that his communication style was very, very bold, very direct. He was a D on the disc. And most of his stakeholders were not that, I'll say. So they were more, they were more nurturing. They maybe were the eyes, which is like cheerleader type, or they were the S, which is the support team. And so they found his communication style to be really difficult to take. So did the needs assessment. I then did a 360 review on him as a leader. And then I delivered, along with the sponsor was there, I delivered the feedback to him. He was stunned. He was completely blindsided. But he also had enough humility to realize that all the people I interviewed were saying the same thing. So there must be something to do. There must be something I got to do differently. And they were in the process of going from a regional organization to a national organization. And they were able to do that successfully. And
Nice.
Part of the reason they were able to do that successfully was because he really took to heart the feedback that he got about his communication style. And it wasn't easy. I'm sure he's still a work in progress 3 years later, but he really cared enough to do it.
Yeah, I love that. Now, if I could take you back to the younger you, the young woman who grew up in a family, a community that didn't really understand who you were, if you could go back and give that young woman 3 nuggets of wisdom based on what life has taught you up until this point, just in case there's a young woman who's listening to this podcast right now, what would those 3 nuggets of wisdom be? What would you have wanted somebody to have said to you at that time?
Trust your intuition. Trust your gut. The body doesn't lie. And I've learned that really powerfully from doing the somatic trauma healing work that I've done, is the body doesn't lie. And I grew up, I was gaslighted all the time in my family of origin. There was this big shameful secret that my mother had me out of wedlock, and then she married this guy who adopted me. But I was raised the oldest of 6 kids, but I never felt like I belonged. And there were all sorts of little clues. But because I kept getting gaslit and told, no, we didn't have a baby picture for you from the hospital because blah, blah, blah. Well, it's because she was in a home for unwed mothers, 1967. That, they didn't do that. So just different things like that. So it took me a lot to learn how to trust my gut. And I will say that as an adult, every time I have taken a wrong turn, it's because I wasn't listening to my gut. So trust your gut. The second piece of information, I almost want to say trust your gut 3 times. It's that important. But the second would be to find your community, even if it's 2 or 3 people that you can be your whole self with. Be with them, and don't let those bonds get strained. Even, it's very easy when you are with a romantic partner to, sometimes not pay as much attention to your friends. Don't do that. I really needed my friends when my beloved and I were going through a rough patch and we separated for almost a year, and my friends were just priceless at that point. And then the third thing would be, and I think it was Henry Ford who first said this, but whether you think you can or you think you can't, you're right. So I believe that if I have an idea in my head, no matter how outrageous it sounds, you want me to produce and direct a theater performance? I have no theater background. Okay, but if that idea is planted in my head, then Spirit has a plan for me, and I will get the support I need. And I did. Got all the support I needed to do that. So, don't don't cut yourself short.
I love that. I absolutely love that. Now, you and I clicked on the whole storytelling and the power of storytelling aspect of our lives. What has storytelling done for you, and what have you seen it doing for the people that you work with?
So, storytelling hits us at a very primal level. Like I think the brain stem, like the oldest part of the brain, is where stories live. And I might just have totally made that up, so don't quote me. But it is so primal for us to listen. I mean, like stories around the fire, growing up listening to my grandmother tell stories of living in Ireland. And I recently read somewhere that somebody did a study, and 63% of the participants could remember the stories that the presenter told, and only 5% could remember the data. Now, this was very challenging for me because I am highly intelligent, graduated undergrad and an MBA, summa cum laude. Like, I like data. The numbers don't lie, right?
Yes.
But there is a huge business case for diversity in companies. If the numbers really meant anything, we would have a lot more diverse companies right now, but they don't. It's the stories are so much more meaningful.
Yeah. Yeah.
And as women entrepreneurs, I touched on this briefly earlier, that only something like 2% of the VC funding goes to women of color, and that is criminal. But what often I thought, because I have a friend who's an angel investor, and one of the things that she really does with her mentees is that she teaches them how to craft a compelling story that will, and a compelling story has to speak to the audience that it's being told to. Yes. Like a compelling story to a bunch of venture capitalists is going to be very different than the compelling story we tell our girlfriends.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so true.
Yeah, so you have to kind of know your audience and know what are they looking for. And in this case, they're interested in the bottom line. So how quickly can you scale? How much money can you make me? I mean, which is terrible. I really think we're in the end stages of capitalism here, and it can't go soon enough. But this is what we have. This is what we have to work with now.
Yeah. So let me teleport you into the future with my last question for this interview. And we're going to have a little thought experiment. You are now 90 years old, and you're sitting in your rocking chair, surrounded by your family, your children, your husband, your friends. If you could teleport into the future and go and have a conversation with the 90, based on all of the work that you've done with workplaces and organizations to improve inclusivity, equity, and belonging, what would you say to this wise woman who's led you to that point?
What would I say to her, or what would she say to me?
What would you say to her, the present you going into the future?
Okay. I think in this current place that I'm in, I would say I would have a question. And that question is, how can I best persevere? How can I not give up on this vision of brave cultures?
Very, very interesting. The reason why I love to ask people that question is sometimes we forget that the wise woman is already in us. She's already guiding you. She's already here. And I love to play with this because when I'm struggling with something and things aren't going right, I tap into the essence of who I am becoming.
Yes.
And I ask her questions, what is the next step? And
Yes.
then going inward and trusting that
Yep.
seed that is in you that has got you on this path in the first place,
Yep.
and just remembering that you've got all the answers already.
Yes. And what she says to me is, don't give up.
Yes.
It's coming. And then she says, you visionaries always have this problem. You see a really compelling vision for a better world, and you expect it to be done in 5 years? Honey, this takes work. This takes decades to come to fruition. Don't you dare give up.
Yeah, I love that. I absolutely love it. I've so enjoyed this interview, Johanna. I feel like I've met a sister from another mother. The first time we met, there was just something really magical about our connection, and I'm looking forward to staying connected with you in the future. Thank you so much for the interview.
Same here, Gertrude. I so appreciate being here and our budding friendship.
And thank you to everybody who's tuned in. The Diversity Connector is bringing people from all over the world with different perspectives. And it's when we start to realize that every perspective counts, every perspective makes a difference, that we really become a diverse human race. Thank you so much. Tune in again tomorrow when I interview yet another amazing guest. In the meantime, have a fantastic day, morning, or evening, wherever you are in the world. And Johanna, thanks again for the interview. Bye for now.
Thank you, Gertrude. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.
Take good care.
And that's a wrap, everybody, on today's episode of the Diversity Connector podcast. Thank you for tuning in and being part of our vibrant and global conversation. I'm your host, Gertrude Mache, and it's been an honor to share this space with you, where voices from all walks of life come together to weave a tapestry of diverse perspectives. Remember, every story you've heard today is a thread in the larger fabric of our shared humanity. So, as you step back into your world, carry these stories with you and let them inspire you to embrace and celebrate the rich diversity around us. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review our podcast to help us share these inspiring stories with more listeners. Do follow us on social media by looking for the Diversity Connector podcast for more updates. Until then, keep connecting, keep listening, and keep celebrating the beauty of diversity. This is the Diversity Connector podcast signing off. Stay curious, stay open,